urban spaces, and buildings surrounding them. Streets and buildings fronting them. Urban spaces and streets are the third dimension of a city's master plan. They are the stuff of urban design and inseparably of architecture. Historic and contemporary, good and bad, fitting or not. Many people shape a city. One of them, and one of the most talented, colorful, and most influential, was Richard Hedman. You might have seen him strolling down a street with a frown on his forehead, checking things out, looking approving or disapproving. During the 1970s and 80s, San Francisco, like most American cities, experienced an unprecedented high-rise boom. With it came big builders, big architects, and even bigger public debates about the merits of large and tall buildings and how to fit them into the existing urban context. In 1971, Alan Jacobs hired Richard Hedman as the principal urban designer of the city's landmark urban design plan.
At the time that I came to San Francisco and the time that Dick came on board with the city planning department, the field had changed and was no longer really concerned with design, with three-dimensional physical design in relationship to people and how they enjoyed or didn't enjoy their lives. Planning was moving from that, and there was a vacuum of urban design, very, very sadly, and we felt it was terribly important to bring that back. I think that one of the things that Dick did magnificently, really well, was to express his concern about cities that had to be designed. Here was an architect who spent his time on the city, truly on the city, not on buildings.
He was kind of my conscience in urban design. I was supposedly this hotshot urban designer who was now planning director, but I often forgot things, important things, and Dick always asked the embarrassing questions that reminded me of this. So I really thought of him as a kind of a conscience.
In the early 1980s, Richard Hedman became the principal urban designer of the much-acclaimed San Francisco downtown plan under the leadership of planning director Dean Macris.
Well, I should say that having Dick Hedman in the planning department was a luxury. Having a man who spent his entire professional career thinking about urban design and really focusing on San Francisco and making a contribution from the very early days in the early 70s with Alan Jacobs and the urban design plan, which took urbanity in our field a great distance. And then in the early 80s, again working on the downtown plan, where Dick was one of the principal people dealing with what shape and form we should give downtown and how it should be expressed in individual buildings and creating new rules for San Francisco. He was an extraordinary man and made a special contribution to the downtown plan.
Everyone knows Dick also as someone who could cartoon and draw quite well, and one of the most useful things for us was his ability to diagram urban design principles. The matter of buildings fitting in, for example. Dick could make even the best but inappropriate building look awful so that you knew that it was not what it was supposed to be. Too big, too funny in its shape, and so forth and so on. But that was one of the most important contributions I think he made, although one doesn't often think of an architect and urban designer as a cartoonist.
My favorite cartoon We all had a favorite Dick Hedman cartoon, I suppose, but it was the one with the planter standing on a hill, however insignificant the hill, in tails, because Dick loved to show the pomposity of planters, and he did that through tuxedos and tails, pointing in a direction. And below the hill, right below the planter, is a multitude of people all heading in the opposite direction from the way the planter was pointing. I think sort of encapsulated Dick's great point of view about not taking the thing too seriously. But at the same time, probably in my time here, more architects would call me complaining about Dick Hedman, because Dick took great enthusiasm of ensuring that the public's interest in urban design was going to be expressed in architecture, and he could drive our local architects right up the wall.
Richard Hedman uses a cartoon slideshow, the panel, to teach all of us, students, practitioners of design, and citizens, about what can happen when designers of buildings ignore the urban design context. The occasion he uses to do so is an Architectural Design Awards banquet and design panel made up of non-architects. Here, the urban designer cartoonist Richard Hedman lampoons himself as a design panelist by playfully portraying his alter ego as the pious and pompous Bayward Backstaff. Well, and as an audience heckler, heckling Backstaff. Another member of the distinguished panel is the genteel fashion designer Alice Lint, who boldly surmises that some architects may be fashion conscious. And last, no architect either, the crafty psychoanalyst Dr. Milton Funk, who appears strangely fascinated with some designers' egos. As you might expect, the panel of critics gets into plenty of hot water with its professional audience, and predictably it all heads towards pandemonium. And now, here is the moderator, Mr. Rourke.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome you to the annual banquet of the Architectural Award Institute of America. We're doing things a little differently this year. As you know, some of our younger associates pushed last year for reforming the awards program. They did have a point. Under the old system, our established firms often dominated the winning of awards. Well, the grayheads got the message. Architects are always leaders in the process of change. And this year, everybody wins. Just look under your chairs. You should find a handsome, simulated bronze plaque. If it looks like the design will clash with the awards you already have on your office wall, trade with your neighbor.
Sir?
There are
Sir?
3 different designs.
Sir, I think your committee has totally missed the
Wait,
point.
please, wait, please. I know what you're thinking, but you're mistaken and you're being very rude. The committee has devoted hours of extremely valuable time to broaden the scope of this program, so just try to be patient. I think when you hear our speakers, but first let's have a big round of applause for our award committee. Haven't they done a heck of a job? We think our program tonight is a little daring and could open a few eyes around here, because tonight we're breaking 2 rules. First, we're going to hear some judgments on our very own work, and some of the comments may even be critical. Critical of buildings designed by people sitting in this very room. And the second rule breaker is the speakers tonight will not be architects. Now, it could get a little rough, but as I told our vociferous young member, no architect is afraid of honest criticism. In fact, we welcome it. So let me introduce our honored guests, 3 internationally famous experts on creativity and aesthetics, greats in their own world, and here they are. The world-famous psychoanalyst, Dr. Milton Funk.
Thank you, thank you.
Dr. Funk's fine book, Aberrant Behavior in the Fine Arts, is currently being serialized in Architectural Digest. And now let's welcome Ms. Alice Lint.
Oh, what a wonderful welcome. I'm thrilled to be here tonight.
And here is Broadway's man behind the scenes, Bayward Backstaff.
Oh, I say, too much. The honor is all mine.
Panelists, welcome. The Architectural Award Institute of America is honored to have you here this evening.
Well, since none of us are architects and cannot talk architecture like our audience, we put our heads together and I think came up with a rather novel idea. We will have slides of important architectural work shown on the screen, and then we will give our first impressions and gut reactions to them.
I might add that we have not seen these slides.
And to make it even more exciting, the slides were taken at random from the Institute's Information Services Department. Projectionist, would you please?
Wait. I want to say something to the audience. It is important for you to feel good about yourself before we begin aesthetic analysis. In a group situation of this size, I cannot devote proper attention to someone who is shattered by the critical experience. So anyone who is not entirely sure of himself and his work should please leave the room.
Professor, I can assure you that our members have great confidence in the work they do, and they should because they do great work. Lights, please.
Well, I must say I am looking forward to seeing some of this great work.
Our first building. That seems to be what it seems to be.
Perhaps we had better go on to the next slide. Projectionist, could you?
Another one. No mysteries here either.
I think we're ready to go on. Oh, dear.
Well,
We do not seem to have progressed.
I suppose you could call this naive realism.
Come on, Howie, show these folks something big.
Aha! Now we get to the meat and potatoes, or should I say the asparagus.
How curious.
This building I could psychoanalyze.
Did they really go to all that effort and expense just to shelter an outdoor restaurant?
Don't bother with that. I want to know why.
Why, what?
Why the architect has indulged himself in a fight against gravity.
What amazes me is that they would do this in public. This slide, I want it. Oh, may I have it? It will be the cover for my new book.
Oh, what is your book called, Milton?
The Killer Ego.
Milton, really? Oh, but these slides are fascinating. You know, I never realized how fashion-conscious architects are.
This is a psychiatric gold mine. Ego after ego, struggling for dominance in the public eye. Ostensibly modern, yet so primitive. The ego shows no restraint.
I'm starting to feel sentimental toward those first little buildings.
The ones we couldn't say anything about?
Yes, at least they were normal.
No. You cannot call anything in isolation normal. Normal refers only to compatibility within a group.
Oh, yes, of course. Context. Mr. Rourke, could the projectionist allow us to see that first series of buildings side by side?
Frank, could you put the first 5 slides in side by side? Great. It'll just take a second, gentlemen.
Why, it looks just like a city street.
At the risk of too hasty analysis, I would say they are all normal. The kind of buildings one would like to associate with on a day-to-day basis.
Each is different in detail, but they share a common approach, like actors in a well-produced play.
But here are the other 5.
I wouldn't call that a city street.
Insane. I would call it insane.
It does look a little mad, doesn't it? Projectionist, may we see both sets together?
This isn't any different from that last batch.
Another absolute chaos of contrast.
But of course, this is probably just the design stage. In fashion, we let ourselves go wild at this stage. Oh, I recognize those buildings.
Yes, the Trade Center Towers.
2 egos for the price of 1.
You know, they're so big, they don't really seem like buildings.
Wait! I have an important thought. Could it be that buildings are reaching a size where we cannot relate to them in any way? Is there a psychological limit to the proper size of buildings?
Projectionist, could we move in on this a little closer?
Excuse me, just want to interrupt to remind everyone that both hotel bars are open and pouring.
A little closer, if possible. I'd like to see the entrance.
Where did the big building go?
You're looking at it.
I am. It looks just like the others at the bottom. I mean, if you didn't know, you couldn't tell which of these buildings is tall.
It's really a shame. You would expect that building to be as impressive where it meets the ground as where it meets the sky, but it fails.
Failure in this case may be better than that aggressive egotism we have seen elsewhere. Perhaps we are being mercifully spared.
Will the gentleman in the 5th row please restrain himself? Thank you.
That's a rather nice little plaza. A nice place to eat lunch if you don't mind sitting on a marble slab.
Those cold slabs are probably what killed off the miniskirt.
Now, what is this? A group of little plazas all together.
I find this irrational. A plaza is a nice surprise, an open space among buildings, but there's no reason for a plaza to be next to a plaza.
Frank, would you please pay attention and change the slide tray?
I think contemporary American plazas fail because our sleek modern buildings do not define space well.
I'm not understanding you, Baird.
Well, just look at that modern building. Your eye just slides up and over it. Isn't that right?
But look, Baird, that is a well-defined space.
But doesn't it strike you as rather sad when the only way one can create a strong plaza next to a sleek building is to sink a hole into the ground?
Dr. Freud would have interesting things to say about the compulsive need to create a tall building and a small hole.
If we can continue, have you noticed that where there are older buildings facing a plaza, they are much richer spaces?
You mean older is better?
I think Bayard is referring to style.
I think they work neither because of age nor style, but because of certain principles of design.
Like what?
Projectionist, could you zoom in?
Certainly there is a lot of gingerbread decoration on it, and it looks heavy.
Massive, Dr. Funk.
It has a big cornice on it.
Doesn't the cornice do an interesting thing, Alice?
Why, yes, it stops the eye from sliding up. A basic principle of design, you're right.
But what is important is that the doodads provide a sense of scale people can relate to, like having a man's thumb in a picture of a baby hummingbird.
I'm forced to raise the question, if cornices work so well, why don't architects use them?
They're probably not fashionable now, but wait a few years, Bayard. They will come back like platform shoes. Oh, it's one of those clever mirror buildings. It's almost not there at all. I think it's chic.
I wonder what a plaza would look like framed by mirror buildings.
Either Kansas or a solar oven, I'm not sure which. But in any case, it's approximately 50% architecture and 50% illusion.
What people could experience joy or show spirited productivity in such a monstrosity. I would say it also is an illusion, and a decidedly negative one. Violence!
All right, who threw the baked Alaska? Ushers, will you get that man out of here? Dr. Funk, may I apologize on behalf of the entire Institute. You may be offensive, but that attack was quite uncalled for.
Obviously, he was not prepared for the critical experience.
What on earth is that?
That's what you get when you place a 10-story mirror building next to a 10-story modern fortress. The question is, what does it mean?
Does it have to mean something?
Well, it could.
If nothing else, it means a silly-looking city. A chaos of contrast. No place to be a person.
Right.
Bayard, the contrast here is just as radical as in the previous slide, which I didn't like, but frankly, I think this is marvelous.
Ah, it's beautiful. It illustrates an old psychological truth. Opposites can exist in beautiful harmony and can enrich...
In this case, the buildings are complementary to each other, whereas before they were combative.
Exactly. They need each other.
Take away the massive, ornate older buildings, and the effect becomes less and less satisfying.
Yes, it's going. Look at it. It's becoming duller and duller.
Oh, no.
Now, the only interesting thing in the picture is that one old building. It's all gone.
From a rich garden to a wasteland in 5 easy steps.
Didn't they know what they were doing?
Unfortunately, there are great economic incentives to commit atrocities, and few to prevent them.
Not to mention the ego gratification. Oh, hey!
Gentlemen, again, please stop throwing objects. Those rolls are quite hard and could result in serious injury.
Oh, look at those.
Set off by themselves, they might do well, like frontier heroes.
But together they're a bunch of prima donnas in an opera without a score. You won't get any music that way, nor urban design either.
Oh, it reminds me of the time I brought together 6 patients, each of whom was certain he was Napoleon. No,
It's one-upmanship that would embarrass even a fashion designer.
If architecture is prose and music is Goethe claimed, what we have here is a commercial jingle. There!
Get that bum off the stage!
Now, please be quiet.
I see no point in continuing this. From an aesthetic point of view, these scenes we have viewed are atrocious.
Panelists, I think it's time to...
Yes, but not each building in itself.
No, the collections, the juxtaposition.
The whole is so often less than the sum of its parts.
Panelists, our time is...
If architects remain so indifferent to surroundings, the task of creating living spaces must be turned over to someone else. Our streets and open spaces are too important.
Yes.
Well, I guess this is as good a place to cut it as any...
Wait, don't interrupt. Mr. Backstaff is experiencing a breakthrough.
There is only one way out. You must all cease being architects. You must separate fantasy and reality and give each its due. You must become stage designers when you create public spaces. And you must...
Thank you very much, panelists. The program is over, and thank everyone for being a wonderful...
The program is not over. Will everyone with the least bit of open-mindedness remaining please be seated and be quiet?
Will someone get that punk off the stage?
Now, I don't know what Mr. Backstaff intends to say, but he's made some observations and criticisms that I don't think we can ignore.
Young man, adults can always ignore nonsense. Now, if you'll please sit
I
down.
don't think we can intelligently answer. And now he's made a positive suggestion for change.
Obviously, this is some kind of radical plot.
I want to assure the big enchilada over there that there is no plot. But I have come prepared. Projectionist, the slides I gave you, please. Why should we accept trivial, insipid streets and plazas when we could just as easily have drama and excitement? You, as designers, can create rich, comfortable streetscapes for people once you cast off the chains of modern architectural dogma.
Ah, it's a lovely fantasy, Bayard. Perhaps you might come to my office sometime.
But this fantasy, as you call it, works. Notice how those sculptured cornices give life to the space.
Bayard, I can appreciate the involvement your design creates, but isn't it awfully eclectic?
Well, these are just some things I whipped together out of tacky old stage sets at the Met. The point is, the spaces work for people, for life.
Well, perhaps this could be successful. Actually, it provides a dramatic setting.
Accenting contrast must be carefully introduced, enough to make it interesting, but not so much as to produce chaos.
We must go further. I say only the most important public and non-commercial buildings, like a city hall or a cathedral, should contrast. Because now everyone wants their building to be the centerpiece. This is the only practical solution to the ego problem.
Why are we standing for this? These three weirdos know nothing about architecture. Are we gonna let them tell us we're dead, our buildings are unreal, our streets are inhuman? No!
Will everyone please calm down? Let's act like professionals.
Bayard, you're creating mass hysteria!
Look out! I think they're going to attack.
You can't drive these questions away with your prestige or your reputation, and you won't drive them away with a show of force. You must deal with them honestly. On guard!
In guard yourself, you little jerk.
Bayard, get onto the table before it's too late.
Architecture is dead. Long live design.
All right, who turned on the lights? Will someone please put the lights on?
And so we end this enlightening discussion in total darkness.
Out of the darkness will come the dawn of a new age.
Richard Hedman was passionate in his search for order and beauty.
He was never a purist. He wasn't a hardcore, a preservationist. He wasn't a pure planner. He wasn't, a crusading architect. He was somebody who enjoyed a certain kind of urban life, and he knew a lot about what made a city a good place to be in. People love to come to San Francisco, and they feel good about it, even if they don't like cities. My own relatives who live far from here, they think of San Francisco as a great place to come to, even though they hate cities. And Dick knew about this, and I think his love of parades and those kinds of public events, is all tied in with parades. I mean, you can't have a parade on the Great Plains very successfully. You need to have an urban context for it.
This summer I drove along one day trying to find the Villa Montalvo. I drove along Stevens Creek Boulevard in San Jose. All the buildings are set way back from the street. There's absolutely no street definition at all. You could be anywhere in the United States or Canada and not have any sense of location at all. And I thought, well, this is the sort of street that Dick would absolutely loathe.
Literally, at the end of a long and winding road, Richard Hedman and his partner, Andrew Yashevsky, built their home, designed in the rigid discipline of Palladian geometry, but brimming with Hedman's keen and at times bizarre brand of humor. During 20 years of creative service in a planning bureaucracy, the cartoonist was able to hang on to his humor.
Among all the gray suits and striped ties of the developers and some of the architects, he certainly was a lot more colorful, and I think he had more of a sense of humor, dealing with making the city a more interesting place than some of the other characters who were on the stage.
He was completely independent and I'd say refreshingly uncorruptible.
While confined to a wheelchair during his last year, Richard Hedman rose above his physical paralysis by giving life to a series of bronze sculptures which, symbolically, set his spirit free, ultimately transcending earthly confinement. Richard Hedman was a prolific artist, Here is a look backstage, revealing how he produced his two most artful slideshows, The Panel and The Dig. Hedman began by building a stage set, then arranging and rearranging actors and props. Once they were in the right position, he recorded them on a slide. Here we meet the Dig's curmudgeon, Sir Rodney Piltdown, a humorous alter ego for the cartoonist Richard Hedman himself, and Sir Rodney's loyal assistant, Lydia Relic, as well as her zealous young nephew, Nigel Relic. In this, his second cartoon, The Dig, Richard Hedman whizzes us far into the future, 1,000 years from now, only to afford us a rueful look back at our cities today. Sir Rodney leads us into the hills above what used to be the Architecture and Planning School of the University of California at Berkeley. The odd group's curious gaze into the ancient caverns is the beginning of a scurrilous, though serious, exploration with an unexpected, cataclysmic ending that points to an age of unbridled individualism and urban expansion, with the fate of the human condition and that of our cities hanging in the balance.
Through great trial, I have learned one profound, eternal truth. Hindsight is better than foresight. This is not meant as an excuse. There can be no excuse for the horror I and others unwittingly unleashed on innocent people. Oh, but I was a smart young student when we started on our ill-fated expedition into the sinister-looking Berkeley Hills. I thought myself superior to everyone, including our leader, Sir Rodney Piltdown, and his skilled assistant, Lydia Relic. I remember how it all began to this very day.
This is the place, everyone. The natives can start digging right here. Katuga, Digida Dopa, Dapudu. Somewhere down there are the remains of a great university and all the secrets of 20th century architecture.
Oh, Sir Rodney, how can you be so certain? The hills are so bleak and empty, it's hard to believe. The native crew seems to have uncovered something, Sir Rodney.
Good show.
Our first remarkable discovery. It looked like a gigantic evil diamond embedded in the parched earth. It was both beautiful and frightening.
This appears to be some kind of clear plastic.
What are those things floating in it?
They are instruments either of science or of sorcery.
Sir Rodney, look.
Look! Good God. Why, it's a door.
If you're correct, Sir Rodney, we have uncovered the first intact remnant of 20th century architecture.
The discovery of the century.
You, of course, are wondering how this artifact was spared from the ferroconcrete blight that wiped out all vestiges of this early civilization. It was my conclusion that the huge plastic sheath, the product of an abortive art student project, had somehow protected it from the deadly virus.
I, Sir Rodney Piltdown, do hereby open the first door into the 20th century, a great step backward for mankind. It's a veritable treasure house.
We had stumbled onto a veritable treasure house of architectural models, photographs, and equipment.
Architectural models, photographs, equipment.
Something feels very wrong here. Listen.
Everything I've ever dreamed of finding. It's almost too good to be true.
Or too true to be good.
So with great excitement, we began what we were certain would be the most momentous revelation of the 30th century.
Up to now, men have only guessed at the architectural wonders of a vanished golden age. We shall revolutionize history. Lydia, those models, do you think you can arrange them chronologically?
I've already done it, Sir Rodney.
Oh, yes, well, good.
But isn't the pattern rather strange?
Well, these earlier models are generally of a larger scale and made of materials that can be carved and molded.
Yes, they permit considerable attention to scale, giving details and embellishments. Quite sensible.
But these later buildings are smaller.
Yes.
And they're all made of cardboard.
Yes, in fact, they appear as if they were designed to be made out of cardboard.
I informed Sir Rodney that I thought the design of the buildings was influenced by the materials that the models were made with. I wondered if, as a consequence of designing in cardboard, the actual buildings might not begin looking like they were made of cardboard, but no one paid me any attention.
Notice what happened to the roofs as a result.
They are more interesting, a more important part of the design.
Yes, because they did what we are doing now.
Stop speaking in riddles, Lydia.
Sir Rodney, we are looking down on the models, so the roof seems to be the most important part of the design.
I questioned Lydia as to how she could be so sure they didn't keep them at eye level. For once, Sir Rodney agreed with me.
This demonstration should answer the query.
I couldn't see a blasted thing.
Unless each viewer is the same height, a model cannot be at eye level for everyone.
Most of the time, the designs would be viewed from Olympian heights.
Then Sir Rodney noticed something else very peculiar.
These designs, all seemingly different, all have one thing in common.
And that is?
None of the models shows any surrounding buildings.
Perhaps there weren't any.
I pointed out another possibility to Sir Rodney. Other buildings were there, but the designers didn't care what they looked like or how the new buildings would fit it.
If they didn't care,
then our chances of discovering a golden age are very, very slim.
2 weeks passed as we continued our research. Then, on an unusually still and humid afternoon, Lydia Relic was working in a musty vault when we found Lydia, she was incoherent, her face a mask of fever and dread.
Lydia, pull yourself together. I'm sorry, Lydia. Now, tell me what happened.
It was pictures.
Pictures?
Sir Rodney, look carefully at these early architectural drawings. Notice the skill with which plastic detailing is illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Now look at these later drawings.
Ah, yes. They're bolder, brighter.
I pointed out that the new buildings had few or no decorative embellishments, which raised the question...
Did they stop putting decorative features on their buildings because they could no longer draw them?
Or did they lose interest in drawing well because these stark designs didn't require any drawing ability?
That was a mystery we were never able to solve. We went on down the dimly lit corridor. Lydia paused at one point to direct our attention to another group of drawings.
See here, Sir Rodney. These drawings are just like the models. They rarely show the surrounding buildings.
I can't believe they didn't know how to handle the spaces and relationships between buildings.
Perhaps it had something to do with the way they began to seal all their windows shut. Some kind of plague or intertribal warfare?
That's it. These 20th century buildings served as fortresses. People never ventured outside of the buildings, so they didn't care what surrounded them.
You're right, Sir Rodney. It's obviously a defensive construction. Look at those blank walls at the street level.
Clearly designed to repel attackers. They would have to have siege ladders to top those walls.
And look at those narrow, almost hidden stairways providing only slit-like entrances to the deck.
5 good men could hold off an army in a situation like that. Think of it. While mobs stormed in the streets below, the occupants of the building are able to walk in a veritable pleasure garden of fountains and statues.
The golden age we sought was turning out to be a new iron age. An age of hostility and blunted sensibilities, where human feelings were subordinated and mechanical considerations held sway over all.
Surely, this should have been a clue. But foolishly, we pushed on.
The photographic evidence indicates that there was a tremendous simplification, perhaps I should say oversimplification, in most larger projects.
Now, I think I have one for publication, Lydia. These designs seem actually to have been influenced by the nature and power of photography. Apparently, they never understood their limitations. Their architects must have thought they were gods.
Between the two of them, I could see I wasn't going to get credit for a single thing. But I wasn't about to give up. I pointed out how in photographs the endless repetition of simple forms and bleak abstract patterns could create powerful impressions when reduced to black and white. Lydia agreed that
If you walked by the reality, you probably wouldn't give it a second glance. This photograph is exciting, but can you imagine having to walk the length of such a tedious expanse of emptiness?
That's my theory. Photography influenced the way 20th century designers visualized their concepts.
a pile of architectural magazines I uncovered in the corner of a crypt convinced me that there was yet another reason architects strived for buildings that photographed impressively.
Humph! My latest insight is a dilly, Lydia. You know, I think their designers often strived for buildings that would photograph impressively just so they'd be published in magazines and books. What do you think of that? Lydia, are you all right?
I just leaned back and the wall seemed to vanish.
Lydia had accidentally discovered a secret vault. What strange forces of evil had drawn us to find the sealed chamber? What awful secrets did it contain? We were soon to find out.
Lydia, this room you've stumbled upon, it's filled with thousands of pictures of 20th century cities.
But why did they hide them?
We were soon to find out. I quickly set them out on tables I had erected.
Good Lord!
What is it, Sir Rodney?
Why, their cities are literally crawling with armored vehicles, almost as if they turned the city over to them.
See here, these spaces were obviously designed for their vehicles.
Oh, yes, I see. This is what they called a shopping center. Apparently, they replaced their towns and villages with places like these. Such centers must have been unsatisfactory because they failed to provide appropriate places for civic functions, especially parades. I like them very much. Did you know that, Lydia?
Rodney, please.
Frankly, I thought he had gone complete bonkers.
Here is another large area for vehicles.
Odd, the sign says it's a park.
A park for their vehicles. That is strange. They seem to have had more paved parks for their vehicles than green parks for people.
They must have loved their vehicles very much. Apparently, they never walked anywhere.
Do you think that constant travel in vehicles, like the effect of photographs, changed how they looked at things?
Exactly what I was thinking, Lydia. At 50 miles per hour, these dull buildings must have appeared quite satisfactory to them.
The conversation suddenly ceased. It was then that I produced a view of the whole city.
Oh, how horrible! How absolute!
Come, Lydia. It's nothing to be frightened of. Disgusted, perhaps, or full of loathing, but certainly not frightened.
It's total chaos, a formless mess, no sense of order. How did they know where they were? No identifying structures, entrances, or perceptible neighborhood pattern. It's more like a cancer than a city.
I tried to calm Lydia down by pointing out what had obviously happened was that the people had let their vehicles do their urban design for them.
You mean they paid for freedom of movement by sacrificing their environment? How very sad.
Yes, it is. Their design methods, coupled with the insatiable demands of their vehicles, was too much for their cities. It destroyed them.
Oh, you horrid thing!
Not wanting to appear overly negative, I showed her a shopping center which had been created with a beautiful landscaped mall.
See, they did create beautiful places for people. I told you so.
I couldn't help it if the next picture showed that a beautiful place for people was just a tiny speck floating in a sea of vehicles.
As much as I hate to admit it, he's right, Lydia. It is pleasant, but it's still not a town. There are no schools, churches, civic offices, and blast it, still no place to have a parade. You know, when we return to this civilized world, they're certain to have a parade for us. Won't that be exciting? March music, ticker tape, horses, and of course I'll be asked to give a speech on my discoveries in the great square. Their cities were like their architecture. No one seemed to care how the pieces fit together, how buildings should relate to each other, how large buildings should relate to small buildings, how the spaces between buildings should serve the emotional as well as the practical needs of the people. As I look across...
But Sir Rodney never got to give that speech. While he was talking, I had discovered a strange, sealed doorway in the furthest corner of the vault. In a frenzy of excitement, I ripped off the corroded chains and padlocks and flung open the door.
Good Lord! What have you done?
You fool! Who gave you permission? Sir Rodney, what is that terrible odor?
It's from that vault. Wait, in the back. It looks like...
Something is moving, whatever it is.
It's alive!
It's alive!
It's alive!
1,000 years I have waited, and you have finally come back. You know why? Because you know I can design the world's greatest buildings.
Get back, Lydia. He's moving towards us.
With my buildings, you will never have to advertise. My building will be your billboard, will provide your corporate identity.
Sir Rodney, I'm frightened.
I will give you a building that will dominate the skyline and reduce any city to the status of a backdrop.
Everybody start moving toward the exit. And when I say run, run for your lives.
Tourists will adore it. The Museum of Modern Art will love it. Time magazine will tremble with critical ecstasy. My competition will be paralyzed with envy.
If it gets outside, Sir Rodney, it will destroy our world.
I know, Lydia, my love. It must be destroyed.
Sir Rodney, you care.
While Sir Rodney and Lydia stalled the horrid monster I had unwittingly loosed on an innocent world, I rushed out to prepare the dynamite charge.
I will design new forms to dazzle the multitude. Buildings that change color, no problem. A 200-story building that rotates with the sun. Elemental, environmental problems, forget them. My building will be the environment.
Run, Lydia, run, my love.
Yes, Sir Rodney. Sir Rodney, I love you.
I will replace whole cities with a single building. People will live their whole lives in buildings by Howard Rourke, the world's greatest architect.
Sir Rodney and Lydia were married 1 year later, and now operate a small dance studio in upstate New York. Our disastrous expedition was quickly and quietly forgotten. Our quick action had saved the world from harm. But is it dead? Did we destroy the monster or only wound it? Someplace, somewhere, it may be out there, waiting, lurking, ready to strike again.